Let's jump into the recommendations that were included in part one, and just as a revision or a summary, that included the National Charter Against Corruption, the establishment of an independent agency against corruption in public procurement. And this was a lot more specific in recommendation 2 to corruption in public procurement. In the report, when they looked at the observations and the way forward, they seemed to be implying it was going to be a lot more focused around corruption in general, but it was nice to see that the recommendation is very specific to corruption in public procurement. Recommendation 3, and there are 10 recommendations, is protection for whistleblowers. Recommendation 4 is a legal term and a legal mechanism called deferred prosecution agreements that is meant to try and encourage private sector players to more readily and more willingly come forward if any of their people are involved in any corrupt activities in their organizations. Recommendation 5 is around the creation of a procurement officer's profession. I'm going to talk through the implications of each one of these shortly, where it's relevant to us. Recommendation 6 is the enhancement of transparency. Recommendation 7 is protection for accounting officers, accounting authorities that are acting in good faith. 8 is a suggested amendment that they suggest to the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. 9 is not something we're going to spend any time on today, but it's an amendment to the Party Political Funding Act. And recommendation 10, there are a number of them. There's not a lot of detail that's described, but some enactment of revised legislation. And this is all in the public procurement space. So those are the main recommendations. Let me run through a couple of the implications of these, and then we can open up the lines to talk about it. Before I get into recommendation 1, just to remark that the Commission referenced in a number of places in the report, in part 1 of the report, the OECD Principles for Integrity in Public Procurement. And so one of the implications for us here is to look at it and read it. Go to the OECD website, download it, and go through it. It is a very comprehensive document. I think it's 140 something pages, if I'm not mistaken, 142 pages. And it really is a good document, and they refer to a number of the principles that exist, and yeah, good reading. So if there's something as a first step for all of us, it would be to, as public procurement professionals, it would be to read through that and unpack those principles. Now, before I get into the detail, I'm asking the question whether you should take action. Is there a need for you to take action? For example, you might choose, if you want, to just ignore the report. And you're free to do that. And I think there are many out there that will just put it aside and say, interesting, yes, there's something in the report on public procurement, and just leave it at that. And certainly you can certainly do that. You could, if you wanted as well, is to adopt an approach to say, okay, well, I'm sure National Treasury or Provincial Treasury are going to read that report. And so what I will do is wait for them to issue an instruction or a circular or a guideline. You can do that as well. You could also say, hang on a sec, I'm a professional. I have public procurement in my institution at heart. So what are there what is there in the report that I can take to potentially improve practices within my institution? And if anything today, for those who are online, I would hope that that's at least something that you would say, okay, let's see if there's something I can take from here that I could use to improve things within my institution. And the fourth one would be for those who've maybe got a little bit more of an interest in the broader profession, would be to say, maybe there are a bunch of things that are going to emanate out of this report. Let me see if there's some way that I can contribute to the development and the implementation of these recommendations for the profession. So there's just a thought to put to you when we're going through this. And I think just the act that you're online today is probably a good sign for you. And so well done to all of you for being here. But just think through those options as I go through some of these implications. Now, the first recommendation is around the National Charter Against Corruption. And in the summary report, I said, interesting, we do already have an SCM code of conduct. What this National Charter Against Corruption was proposing is something which is in place already. Could be. So one of the things you might want to do is perhaps read the report and its recommendations in one, and review the SCM code of conduct. Again, many of you would have gone through it already, but perhaps once you've read that aspect of the report on their recommendations, you might just look at that code of conduct with a fresh eye. Many of you are already getting into infrastructure-related aspects. So what about potentially putting together a code of conduct for your institution that combines both? That combines both the one that's in the MFMA, PFMA, as well as the CIDB code of conduct. The instructions for PFMA and MFMA, the circular for MFMA, suggests that the SCM practitioners must sign that on an annual basis. And there should be a record of you signing that and acknowledging that you've looked at that again. But what about extending that to other SCM role players, not just the SCM practitioners? The Commission also makes a recommendation about a supplier code of conduct, that the Charter Against Corruption might also be something that institutions require of their suppliers to also sign up to. There are a number of supplier code of conducts that are out there. I know that ESCOM has been using one for some time. There are different ones around the world. What about potentially getting that and starting just the act of getting your suppliers to also start signing up to a code of conduct? And then the last point to suggest is that you, through the process, get prepared to potentially contribute to the development of a revised code. When there is work on this charter, what about yourself having looked through this, participated on it, make some contributions to that particular charter? So there's some thoughts on this recommendation. I'm going to just jump to the next two, and then we can come back and discuss these a little bit more. So that's the first one, recommendation one. Recommendation two is very detailed in the report, and it's all around the independent agency. And I would suggest you go through those recommendations. They're quite detailed, and they describe the specific structures. They describe the roles and responsibilities of each of those structures, and read them and then map those to your institution's SOPs on complaints and challenges. You will certainly find that you've got gaps. but it's a good idea to do that. Then also in both the draft public procurement bill as well as the Zondo Commission's recommendations, there's this tribunal that's included. By the way, this tribunal is not the independent, it's within the independent agencies. So the independent agency's got multiple structures, and a tribunal is one of those. And it's also recommended in the draft public procurement bill. Now, there are institutions that are already working within a tribunal structure, and it might be worthwhile just learning from them and understanding a little bit about that. Now, KZN has got that in place, and I did ask Sonele just before we started today whether he would be kind enough to potentially share with us some of their lessons and experiences in that tribunal, and not necessarily for us as practitioners to understand what are the dynamics at the tribunal, but just to understand what are the implications for us in our institutions. What are some of the things that we might want to start preparing for and changing and building practices into our organizations to help when that gets going. Recommendation 3 is one that I first looked at and said, maybe there's not a lot that we could do here. We have all kind of thought that there is no protection for whistleblowers. Yeah, so let's just ignore this. You know, the Commission says that there is very little protection for whistleblowers. I don't know. One of the things I'd suggest doing is read sections 198 to 202 in part 1 of the report, which is quite a fascinating description of false whistleblowing and what happened at SAA, where the chairperson at the time was involved in creating false whistleblower reports. And I think it's important for all of us to at least understand that, and also understand, you know, where might we possibly use some of the civil society groupings that are out there to support us on this one. In that particular SAA one, I think it was OUTA, OUTA, that got involved in that one. The report makes a lot of reference at times to the UN's Convention Against Corruption. Have you read it? In particular, Article 32.2. And I'm not going to go through it now, just you know, pasted it here just for the record so you can see that it does exist. But important to go through that. It's recommended by the Commission that this be looked at because there are gaps in our existing Protected Disclosures Act on, you know, that there are gaps, there are protections that don't exist within this act, and certainly, but how many of us have actually read that act and looked at it? And is the first time we're going to read it when we are in a position of deciding whether we're going to blow the whistle or not? So maybe read through that and get hold of that Protected Disclosures Act, and then read the UN's Convention Against Corruption. It's these are all available and really good to do. And then lastly, you know, talk with whistleblowers. Just, you know, many of them need support, but it's also very good for all of us who are in this space to just understand what it is that they're going through. Let's just quickly pause there before we get into recommendation 5. So any comments or thoughts from anyone so far on some of those suggestions? And it's fine. No, you don't have to say anything. The independent agency one, there's a lot of detail there, and it's quite insightful when you go through it and you see who does what, and then you compare that with your SOP. And of course, we've done SOPs around this, and I look at those SOPs now, and they're quite weak relative to what this has. And then, of course, there's the whole code of conduct issue. Hey, welcome, Abigail, Enoch, Deirdre, Gaynor, good number of people that have joined. Welcome. All right, let's get going. Hey, Theo. All right, recommendation 5. Recommendation 5 is around the creation of a procurement officer's profession. One of the things to suggest here, because there were some comments that were made when we went through this last week, is just explore the membership opportunities that do currently exist with the likes of SIPS, SAPIX, and SILT. For those of you involved in freight forwarding, there's a freight forwarding association as well. Just look at those options and understand those. What we did do on this platform early in 2021 is we invited each of them to come and make representation to this group and explain to us what they do, how they're structured, and we tried to explore with them the extent to which they accommodate public procurement and public SCM professionals. And I think we all concluded that they are willing to create special interest groups and structures, but they're not currently structured to deal specifically with public procurement practitioners and professionals. So they just do that and just get a little bit familiar with what's going on there. Understand and take an interest in the provisions that exist in the draft public procurement bill. Now, I've opened up the comment section, so if anyone wants to comment on this recommendation, I would be interested to see your comments. What does the draft public procurement bill say about this? There have been many that have approached myself and Henry to say, you know what, given some of the gaps that exist and the gaps that exist within the council, I'm going to talk about this now, perhaps we need our own membership body. And so there's a question that I'm just posing to you. Would you be prepared to assist in establishing this kind of body? And it's very interesting when you look at some of the work that was done in the competency framework that the Supply Chain Management Council of South Africa did last year. For me, it was very insightful because there are probably more public procurement practitioners, public procurement professionals in South Africa than the membership of SIPS and SAPIX and SILT combined, which have, SIPS has got most of the people who belong to membership bodies belong to SIPS, some to SAPIX, and some to SILT, the Council for, what does the I stand for now? Can somebody help me? Logistics and Transport. It'll come to me shortly, but yeah, there are a couple of people in the Transnet group in particular that are members of this, but this is a big group. There are thousands of public procurement practitioners in this country, thousands of us. This should be the biggest group that exists. There are thousands of us. And then review the report on that competency framework that was done, and then also the work that was done by the Supply Chain Management Council of South Africa. So if there's some interest in this, then certainly we can bring in the people that established the council. the website is down. You may need to ask for some of the documentation on that. I don't know if the website will be up again, but it's down at the moment. But this certainly was meant to be the body that was going to ensure that this profession was implemented. There are probably a couple of other things you can do as a in your personal capacity on this one, but there's just some ideas on recommendation 5. Recommendation 6. This is a fascinating one, and it's just on improving transparency in organizations. I had a discussion with a person yesterday on what topics they should look at for their doctorate, their PhD that they're busy looking at, and it's a public procurement person, and we got into, and it was actually himself that suggested probity, and I don't think he was ready for the input I gave on probity, but sincerely, everybody, we need to rethink our mindset on probity. The Gauteng province has implemented a probity audit process, and that process was in place. My understanding of that process is it has been a compliance audit process and not a probity audit process. And I don't think we understand yet in our profession what is meant by probity. And we really need to change our mindset. Now, let me just share with you a little bit about why, from a Gauteng province perspective, the probity audit process failed. And I know there are people from Gauteng here. Yes, the compliance audits have improved things, and the compliance audits have improved the level of compliance and reduced the amount of, potentially reduced the amount of irregular expenditure findings that exist. But the essence of probity is transparency and having the evidence of transparency in place to reduce corruption. And Gauteng, you failed, right? You failed, utterly failed on that one when one looks at the PPE debacle. As soon as the tender process stopped and there were no compliance audits, the emergency procurement processes forgot completely about transparency, and we failed. Thandi.
Hi, Sean.
Hi.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I don't know, maybe I think maybe the word fail is a strong word to use. To maybe get a bit of background on the probity audit that was introduced in Gauteng. They even had it was gazetted. Actually, it was even, they went as far as gazetting it. And one of the things about probity, firstly, it was put on a threshold basis. I think it was everything above 2 million.
Above 2 million, yeah.
To probity process. But what you need to understand is that the probity was done for tenders and under normal circumstances. And with your COVID, it was purely emergency procurement. Yes, in terms of transparency, everything else, it failed, I agree. However, I think maybe from the context of Gauteng, one needs to understand in terms of how it was being.
I understand.
It was purely on the tendering process.
But that's the point, though, right?
No, but here's the thing.
Probity is not a compliance practice. It's a mindset, and it's a principle embedded in procurement. It's not compliance. And so it should not be focused just on tenders above 2 million.
You're correct. I think, Sean, for me, I'm still hurt by the fact that it actually did not work out, because really, the heart was in the right place. And when it started, I was fortunate enough to be there when it started. I was really, really excited about it. It's just that maybe it did not receive as much support from everybody else,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
you agreeing with you on the part of it failing, I can agree with you on the part, because it saddens me to admit that actually the under expenditure in Gauteng province is as a result of poverty audit. You know,
It's interesting.
it has actually, yes, it has created more problems than solutions.
Yeah.
But really, I still personally feel that the heart was in the right place. It's something that maybe should be looked at and improved upon. And I think that we can get some good things out of it. You know, yeah.
Good, good. Thanks. Thandi, I think the point here is that compliance is not probity. And what has happened is, sincerely, this is what's happened. The audit profession have created a service offering called a probity audit. But they've changed, they've rebranded compliance audits probity audits, and probity is not compliance. And so I'm just, I think the essence to this one here around enhancing transparency is what we've really got to understand. And so, hey, I think this is one thing we've got to understand is what is this probity thing? Of course, we must look at the OECD report, and particularly on their transparency principles. And then I think it's incumbent on us to review the processes and the practices within your organization around transparency. Very important one. Thanks, Thandi. Great contribution. Recommendation 7 is the protection of accounting officers and authorities who are acting in good faith. Now, I noted the recommendation was purely around the accounting officer and the accounting authorities, but there are many others that act in good faith. It's not just the accounting authorities that need protection. It's also SCM people. And so one of the things that I would suggest that we do as public procurement practitioners is understand what is meant by good faith and bad faith. What is it? Understand the provisions already in place in PAJA and also case law. And I've quoted the case law, the particular case here that creates the precedent and provides protection already for those who act in good faith. But one of the big things, and why I was so interested to see this in the report, is in the last year, Henry and I, in our bid committee training, have started to focus on this issue of good faith and bad faith. And one of the big questions that you want to be able to answer as a public procurement practitioner, and it's not just in the space of corruption, it's in the space of any finding that might occur that is an irregular expenditure finding, or a fruitless and wasteful expenditure finding, or a material irregularity that might be raised by the Auditor General, is when that does happen and your name is included in the hat as being part of the process that resulted in that fruitless and wasteful expenditure, for example, how can you demonstrate that you acted in good faith? And start to understand the personal practices and the things that you must do, so that if there is a finding, if there is a case, if you then do need protection, that you've done what needs to be done to demonstrate that you acted in good faith. And this is a fascinating thing to get into and understand as a practitioner, is what is this? If there is a finding, how would I explain that what I did was in good faith? Hey, Lindiwe.
So is there a difference between acting in good faith and acting in the best interest of the organization?
Probably from an outcome perspective, there's no real difference.
Yeah, I'm asking this because, you know, in our SCM, it's very difficult to have discretion. So there's an irregular expenditure, but as part of my defense, I'm arguing that I applied my professional judgment, I applied my own discretion, and I was acting in the best interest of the organization.
So
is it the same as saying I acted in good faith? Because, you know, when you say you acted in good faith, it sounds more as if
very interesting.
It's personal. It has to do with me, you know. I did what I thought was best for me, but when I say I acted in the best interest of the organization, I think it carries more weight. I don't know. That's I'm just thinking out loud today. Sure.
It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. Thandi?
Sean, I think in answering Lindy, when you look at the regular expenditure guidelines.
Just a little bit louder, Thandi.
Sorry. When you look at the regular expenditure guidelines, when you do those determination exercises, the key thing that is of interest for government firstly is, has there been a loss? You know, and was there value for money? Because remember, with the regular expenditure, it doesn't mean that there's corruption, doesn't mean that there's fraud or whatever.
Yeah.
You could have gone out to the market, gotten your 3 quotations, and then the highest point scorer, the BE certificate is on point, everything, but the tax clearance has expired. So now this person is the highest point scorer, maybe is the cheapest, and he gave you the good quality service and everything, but their tax clearance expired. Therefore, it is irregular expenditure. Now, when you assess that in your determination exercise, as Lindy was saying, that doing what is the best, or what is in the best interest of the organization, maybe the service was needed at that point in time, and based on the market that she tapped on, she did receive value for money. However, there has been this irregularity and a call was made. And therefore, one can then argue to say there has not been a loss, because I've picked up that a lot of time where you actually find that there was a loss, that's where then it becomes tricky.
Yeah, yeah. Very good point. Very good point. One of the things that one of the reasons why this is raised is particularly in bid committees, where you've got a committee making a decision and there might be, you know, something or someone in the committee that's acting in bad faith, but you were acting in good faith. And the committee then is found to be liable, you know, and currently in the existing version of the abuse, the SCM abuse instruction, it says that you're jointly and severally liable. So, you know, if there is a bad decision that was made, but you still acted in good faith, how would you defend yourself in that respect? And, you know, there's simple things to do, but it's an important one to unpack and do. Great questions, Lindy. Good contribution, Thandi. Very good. We're almost there. Recommendation 8. Now, the Commission has recommended specific changes to this Act. There's also some statements that were made around you know, investigating why the prosecuting authority isn't prosecuting, and why there have been so few cases, successful cases, where people have been found guilty of contravening this Act. But this is going to give an increased focus on this Act. So I think important for you, for all of us, to unpack what the Act states, and also the regulation. For those that don't know, the regulation is actually the Register of Tender Defaulters regulation. The Register of Tender Defaulters falls under this Act. It's a specific regulation. So very interesting that fragmentation of our, I think the Zondo Commission's report talks about the mosaic of legislation that we're operating under. But it's probably time to relook at this, and because there's going to be a focus on this one. And you would know that part of the Act says that if you are aware that somebody is involved in a corrupt act, you must report that. Now, there's a little threshold that's stated in the Act, below which you don't have to report it, but above which you do have to report it, which is an interesting one. But very important to start getting on top of this one. With this whole Commission's emphasis, there's going to be, I believe, a much bigger focus on this, and it'll be very interesting and very important for all of us to really be on top of our game as far as this one is concerned. Now, I'm not going into the political party funding issues, so I'll just jump to recommendation 10. These have got big implications, and I don't know if there is a lot that you can necessarily do in your institution for these, but I think it's important that as a professional that you start to think about what this means. Now, the first recommendation is the greater centralization of public procurement and in certain aspects. Now, there are a number of different issues here. One is, are they really going to take parts of SCM and centralize it? I don't think so. I think a lot of this I think is going to fall back into a legislative issue. And the context of the greater centralization was this, that Treasury put out legislation that is very open to interpretation, and the interpretation happens at a local level. And Willie Matebula was often quoted when he said that in his estimate, about 50% of the problems that occur because of misinterpretation of legislation, and 50% of the problems are because of some corrupt act of some sort. But very interesting. So, what does this mean? And we're going to get into big discussions as a community of practice around what this means. And this has got big implications for the public procurement bill. It's got big implications for the organizations that you serve. How do you centralize more, but ensure that the different institutions that exist and the very disparate goods and services and infrastructure the different organizations are buying, that it still remains relevant and it still is flexible enough to cater for those disparate commodities that are out there? What really is going to be centralized here? So that's the first one. I think the big one here is for us to just keep an eye on what's going on with the public procurement bill and the continued fragmentation that the bill is allowing, in particular, not addressing CIDB. And this is going to be a big one, and I think that probably it's going to come down to a discussion around the next version of the public procurement bill. Yeah, well, a better guidance. I mean, this is related to the centralization. Better guidance of public procurement officials in applying the legislation governing public procurement. So I don't know, are we going to see a lot more guidelines? You know, many were very disappointed with the Q&A document that was issued around irregular expenditure, that it didn't actually address the questions that people were asking. Yes, there were some interesting aspects in the Q&A document on irregular expenditure, but it didn't provide answers to questions that people had. You know, is that what we're going to get more of? You know, very, I don't know. These are things that we as professionals are going to need to take, you know, get involved in some way. I will share with you just now something that started. Better training of public procurement officials, and then the last one, which is this odd one around discontinuance of any deviation based on the concept of sole source. And I think, if anything, there is probably a need for you to just go back and have a look at your SCM policies and just make sure that you've defined sole source very clearly, and that you've made that distinct and different from single source. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. Greater centralization in terms of decision making for procurement or transversal tenders type of, like NT. Yeah, good question, Tabelo. I mean, that's the big question. Is that what it's going to mean? Is that we have you know, more emphasis on transversal agreements, transversal contracts at a national and provincial level? Is that what it's going to be? That's a very good question. Don't know, but we've got to start understanding this as practitioners, and to try and address this one. This centralization is also seen in the context of the training. They're saying the extent of decentralization at the moment is wrong, given that we don't have adequate skilled professionals in all the institutions. Now, all of you online today would be exceptions to that, but that was what the commission was saying, is just there are too many institutions, there are too many people that are needed in a decentralized environment. It's not practical to decentralize when you don't have the people to run those things at a central basis. So this is going to be a big one going forward, and I think it's just discussions we're going to need to have and look into. And I think that that was my last slide. Yeah, that was my last slide on some of the thoughts that I had on what it is that we could do. Any other thoughts? Skill is not a problem. It's the decision to not capacitate SCM. Just want to unpack that a little bit, Tundi. Is it maybe it's a capacity and skills, right?
No, Sean, the thing is with supply chain, if you can look, a lot of organizations, number one, you find that they have supply chain being run by interns. Number two, you have supply chain being run by people. Supply chain becomes like a dumping site for problematic people in an organization.
Just so that last point, you people that are running.
Like supply chain, you find in some departments, they are run by interns, one, or supply chain becomes a dumping site for problematic people from other departments. So you find that there is a conscious decision to create this chaos. Guys, we don't have a problem with skill in supply chain. It's leadership being intentional about not capacitating supply chain. You find that big departments with big budgets, they don't have a supply chain manager. They don't even have a structure, but you have people somehow doing procurement activities. So it really, I become offended every time when we hear people saying that there is no skill in government procurement. There is skill. There's a decision to create this organized chaos because it works for some people. It's just sad, but that's just how it is.
Interesting. Good comment. Thank you. All right, there we are. I don't want to belabor the point if there's nothing more. Just wanted to try and unpack this. Any perspectives? Hey, Advocate Nsaluba, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you got some value out of the discussion.
I'm going to pick it as we go. Thank you.
Good, good. All right.
Thank you very much.
Good one. All right. That's it from my side. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add in terms of these recommendations and what it is that we should do. Certainly, it's going to be important to run through the procurement aspects in part 2 of the report and just see if there's anything that potentially just gives a little bit more insight and context to these recommendations. So that certainly will be done by different people. To give a little bit of feedback on some of the suggestions that was raised last week, I think Lindiwe made one of these suggestions and was saying we need to potentially get OUTA involved and others. There is a Lindiwe, there is some progress on that point, and there's somebody who's starting to reach out to the different NGOs and civil society who is going to try and just get more people together that could put a little bit more pressure on, I don't think it's just Treasury and the OCPO, but to put more pressure on the politicians who can make some decisions in terms of the procurement space and getting some things done, because there's too much to do, and there's just not enough being done. So there's some work that's being done on that point. Part of why I couldn't get others involved today, but we'll certainly give. So here's a question. Of these different recommendations that I've just gone through here, are there any that you think would be good for us to unpack in future sessions? Any more interest in the OECD principles? Is there anything more that people are interested in around the supplier code of conduct? You could put some comments down in the chat, or you could unmute. The whole suggestion that I had, are you interested in potentially understanding a little bit more about the tribunal and how the one in KZN is operating, and what we can learn from that? What about unpacking and understanding a lot more around the UN's Convention Against Corruption? Would you like to talk more with whistleblowers? Do we bring people on who were involved in getting this going, the SCM Council for South Africa? Is there any interest in unpacking and understanding this issue around transparency more, and potentially getting into issues such as, what does probity really mean? Any interest in understanding and unpacking this whole issue of good faith and bad faith? There are. So I just wanted to put that to you. You can certainly give. I didn't put it. I guess I could have done that. I could have done a little poll and just got you to. Maybe I'll do that for next week. Hey, Abigail. Thank you, Abigail. You're saving me here. I'm getting worried.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. I've always thought that the issue of professionalizing procurement will be is a good thing. Yes, we need to go that direction. But of late, I've started to wonder if it's really going to help. The reason why I say that is because I think the way public procurement is designed is it makes it difficult for the procurement official, because the way we operate, the decisions that get made, they are in committees. And the SCM professional will just be playing maybe a
facilitator role,
a facilitator role. And the decisions that get made in BECs, in BAC, the SCM is just facilitating. So if you look at other professions, if you look at a CA, if you look at a legal counselor, a person from a legal profession, it's easy to trace a decision that's made by that individual. And it is easy to hold them accountable and liable for whatever decision that they made. Unlike for a procurement officer. So I think as long as the design of public procurement remains as is, I'm not too sure if professionalizing procurement will really give us the results that we think it's going to do it.
Because there are very few transactions that are signed off by the head of SCM. And,
yeah,
it's a recommendation that gets made through. Abigail, what about the fact that many SCM practitioners are asked for their opinion? Is that not maybe where it becomes relevant? You know, so in a bid committee, you're asked.
In how many? Yeah, they are. But in how often does that happen? And it usually happens where the procurement professional is assertive and they've established themselves. You know, they have proven themselves to have that knowledge power in the organization. Because we do not, SCM professionals, we don't have power in the organization because structurally we don't. But one can only establish that through knowledge. If they have the knowledge and they establish themselves that they are knowledgeable and they are upfront and assertive, that's when they'll be sought. But in most instances, I doubt if that happens.
It's gonna, If we look at some of the names of the people that have been mentioned in the Zondo Commission, there was the head of SAA, who's actually a lawyer, that was found to have received 2.5 million rand, and he went and he blew that on 2 expensive cars or something. He was head of SCM. The other one was Gary Peter was head at Eskom, was head of procurement at one stage, but I think most of his issues all centered around what he was doing when he was in finance. To procurement people, but I can't think of others. So interesting point, Abigail, good one. Piwengesile. Hi, welcome.
Thank you, Sean.
Please help me. Would you mind just saying your name for me, please?
Piwengesile.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sean. I think from the practitioner's perspective, for me, what bothers me in most instances is that we seem to be focusing on policy issues and everything, which is beautiful. We need to have them in place. But the balance that has always been missing is the issue of holding people accountable. And everybody is tiptoeing around it. And you can see that very clearly because institutions ought to have an SCM strategy and systems, and we don't have that. And half of the time, you don't even know what it is. And what has been happening, Sean, is that we see supply chain unit being confused with the supply chain system. And as long as it continues like that, the system is messed up. And no matter how much we try to talk to issues, the absence of the required system, because the Constitution, the PFMA, the PPFA, they all talk to a system. And which means currently, as we speak, institutions are not even doing what is required by the Constitution in terms of their mandate, in terms of Section 217, where they have to establish a system. And what happens, Sean, is that we look at the practice notes and everything from National Treasury as if that replaces the system. And that is the legislative framework where the systems of institutions needs to land. And that is very close to my heart, actually. And as long as accounting officers are not held accountable, professional SCM professionals, procurement professionals are left to fry and they're left dry. And sometimes you look at it as Stanley has said earlier, of which I really agree. Sometimes even wonder whether that is intentional. And sometimes even such discussions do not get into promoting accountability and fighting and making sure that accounting officers are held accountable. Procurement issues are actually elevated to the level where they ought to. And that is where we need to actually, we have to have conversations, because then it talks to behavior. And you cannot correct behavior by policy, by issuing a whole lot of policies. That's where the confusion comes in, because we'll keep on changing policy and think it's going to change behavior. It doesn't happen. We might have to have a separate conversation that really talks to what is a problem here, the real thing that is happening here, because we need to solve it to get to the bottom of it. The country needs it done, resolved. So, yeah, thanks, Sean.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask just your context, your perspective? Are you with TR16A or Schedule 2 or?
Oh, I'm with National Treasury, OCPO.
Thank you. 16A. Very good. Loved it. Fantastic contribution. Thank you. Hey, Lindiwe.
I wanted to say, Sean, it's refreshing to have someone from National Treasury. And I wanted to raise my hand and say something very controversial about Treasury, but now I'll withdraw. I'm not going to say anything. No, Sean. I think, when it comes to the issue of professionalizing our SCM, I wanted to say that the other challenge that we are having, and I might be wrong, most of the colleagues that works at a National Treasury norms and standard, they are not SCM professionals. There are people who have auditing background. They are auditors by profession. They are not like people like myself, Abigail and Tandu, who are like a SCM a practitioner. So I think there also it's a problem, because Willie Matebula is saying that a misinterpretation of the laws, rules, and regulation. But it also starts with the people, the caliber of officials that are sitting in those key positions at Treasury. Because if you write to them, Sean, and ask them for clarity, they won't give you that a response that you expect from people who are seated in that position. They will recode or rephrase what is there on the instruction note. It is very frustrating to work with those people. Sipe, please, if I'm wrong, my sister, forgive me, but we are frustrated. And for a long time, we have asked Sean that, please, can you bring National Treasury to this forum? Because of, as practitioners, we have a lot of problems with National Treasury.
That's correct.
Thanks, Lindiwe. You'll be pleased to know that there have been a number of people from National Treasury that have been attending this year in particular. So Pimwe Ngesihle, thank you for coming through. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I would like to respond, Sean. I think just like Sis Tandy has said, some of us actually have worked
Yes.
in municipalities, established SCM in even Schedule 2s and everything. So when we came to Treasury, we came as professionals, as SCM professionals.
And with that
So
background,
yes, it is in that background that one has an appreciation of how this thing ought to be. Fully appreciating the frustration as well that is coming through, because even the statement that has been stated is correct in terms of that kind of thing that needs to be closed. I think what helps is to be in the position to appreciate what is happening there, and also what is happening as a professional and in terms of policy. That's why it's close to my heart that when we are having such conversations and we have understanding of what policy can do and what ought to be within the institutions themselves, and we have the state of readiness within the two, then we start having proper policy conversations that actually hit home. And that becomes quite clear when we have a proper strategy within institutions, because we begin to divorce that which is always sent to Treasury, which ought to be the accounting officer's responsibility. So one actually begin to see that. And I think as we engage further, we'll actually start to streamline of what SCM or procurement ought to be in real terms, because it's quite, whenever people say there is no capacity, one says and say, I'm a professional. Are you saying I'm not capacitated as an individual? Because we've got so many professional procurement who are actually doing their level best, who are well-versed in the field, but they seem to be clouded within the institutions because of all these issues. So I think we're going to do well, Sean, if we keep on having this kind of conversations.
Good one. Good one. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm hopeful that we'll have a person from the UK that will be joining us next week. And just if it doesn't happen next week, it'll be soon. But just to reflect on some things around, he's a highly respected individual, and we'll just be sharing some thoughts around what's going on globally in the public procurement space. So we'll confirm that as soon as we can. And then, yeah, I've taken note, and all the comments that you've included, we'll see if we can try and get something going. I think it'll be nice to unpack a little bit more around what probity is and what that means. So that's one. Katlejo's point around procurement being as part of the CFO's department is always raised as an issue. I also asked myself very often whether we're ready, and do we have SCM people that are ready in institutions to act at the C level in institutions. Are we ready for that? If that was to change, are we ready? Hey, Tabella.
Hi, Sean. I'm just thinking. Thank you. I'm just thinking, you've got National Treasury that has made it through MFMA compulsory for local government officials in terms of minimum competency, right? And within there's specific professions like, supply chain managers, supply chain management, and officials in terms of minimum competencies. Don't you think maybe if they restructured this so-called minimum competency and started making it intentional to focus on certain aspects, so that you'll have some training that will maybe mirror across from, say, a SIFS type of structure that can be applied and be geared for public sector procurement specialists, then that would work, I'm just referring that there's a recent memo through SALGA where they have gone into some sort of partnership with SIFS, and they sort of given government rates. But if you look at it, it's quite expensive. And in terms of the requirements, I'm not sure how many institutions will be able to fund the officials to go through that process, whereas in terms of minimum competency, somehow there seems to be a lot of funding across board to make sure that everybody had the minimum requirements. Maybe it's time that NT comes back into that space and look at the mechanisms in place and say, how do we improve on those? You know, like, for example, that one I'm talking about in terms of minimum competence, specifically geared for procurement officials. Maybe that could help. Instead of trying to establish a specific body for the time being, it might take a bit of a while before you get to that point.
Good one. Thank you. Let's explore that. I think that would be good. I wasn't aware of the SALGA agreement with SIPS. Interesting one. Yeah, sure. I see your comments there, Lindiwe, but go ahead, Abigail, your question, Lindiwe. Go ahead, Abigail.
Yeah. My suggestion, Sean, to us in this forum is to, I think we need to really read this report, this debt capture reports, and internalize them, and so that we get to the bottom of what the problem is. And I think we shouldn't be quick to want to come up with fixes that we've been doing all along in all these years. And because if you really think about it, where is the problem really coming from? And you could, perhaps the problem is even bigger than us. Because if you look at the OCPO position, since Kenneth Brown left, it hasn't been filled. There hasn't been a permanent person on there. And the issues that are coming here, the SCM Council has been talking about the code of conduct. I was involved in a subcommittee that drafted the code of conduct, but it's been years, nothing has come out of it. We've been talking about professionalization. There's nothing really new in these recommendations that are coming from the state capture report that you've not heard before. So I think we need really to read this and understand it, and then address and get to the bottom of it. Even maybe from our entities, sometimes it may be difficult to bite the whole chunk of the public procurement as such, but let's start small in our own spaces and just start working there, and then we'll get to it, because we've just been going around in circles. And as long as no political will to do this, because if there was, the procurement bill as well, we could be far advanced. Perhaps we could be having it in place by now, but it's still not there. But I'm glad Sihle is here. Maybe they can take the message to the office.
I'm sure they get the message. Thank you. Good one. Good point. Spot on. Hey, Thandi.
Thanks, Sean. To add on what Abigail is saying, I really, maybe because of the PPSIU thing is close to home for me, I really will request the practitioners to also give as much attention to the outcome of the investigations being done by the SIU. And
on
also
the PPE one.
Honestly, colleagues, there's so much for us to learn from. For example, there are contracts that have been set aside because they have been irregularly awarded. We have a lot of contracts that we still have in our own midst that have been irregularly awarded. What does that mean for us in those kind of contracts? So I really also, to add on Abigail, that can the same attention be given to what the SIU is doing? I really think that the SIU is doing a good job in terms of the conversations that we need to be having as SCM practitioners, because some of the things that are being found or judgments that are being found in the court actually are principles, and they have implications on us in terms of how we're going to be doing our jobs moving forward. So really, I think this is quite an interesting time to be a procurement practitioner in South Africa right now with everything that's happening. So to add on to Abigail, please, can also the same attention be given to what the SIU